Tansei, good afternoon. I'm Krisanach Kate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. Search the landfill became a big topic in the city of Winnipeg over the past couple of years. An encampment that started in response to Winnipeg police not searching a landfill for the remains of 2 First Nations women will now soon come down. And the filing of a human rights complaint is also underway regarding that same landfill search. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Camp Morgan, on its 2nd anniversary from when it first began, will put its fire out and shut down for good. It was set up near the city-owned Brady landfill on the south side of Winnipeg on December 18, 2022. Just weeks after Winnipeg police announced Jeremy Skibitsky, who was already in custody for the murder of Rebecca Contois, was also being charged for killing Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and the yet-to-be-identified person given the name Buffalo Woman. Camp Morgan, of course, began as a response to Winnipeg police telling the families the remains of Harris and Myron ended up at the privately owned Prairie Green landfill north of the city, but a search was not feasible. Organizers committed to keeping the camp going until a search happened. After a 15-month political fight, both the federal and provincial governments committed a combined $40 million towards a search. Earlier this month, the physical search of the landfill began. In a Facebook post, Morgan's cousin Melissa Robinson said, quote, "It's only a matter of time now till we are able to bring Morgan home and lay her to rest properly," unquote. Meanwhile, Harris's daughter, Elle Harris, along with 2 other women, Robin Johnston and Susan Caribou, have filed a human rights complaint of discrimination against the city of Winnipeg for not conducting a search of both the Prairie Green and Brady landfills. The complaint says the city discriminated against Morgan Harris, Buffalo Woman, Tanya Nepinak, and all Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA plus people and their families. Nepinak is believed to also be a victim of homicide. In 2012, Sean Lamb was charged in her murder, but the charges were stayed due to lack of evidence. The complaint has 18 reference points the city ignored, including, quote, "on the basis of our ancestry and sex without bona fide and reasonable cause," unquote. The city violated Section 13 of the Human Rights Code. So far, there has been no response from the city. This past August, the man responsible for Harris and the other 3 women's deaths was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for first-degree murder. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Just days after the Manitoba Métis Federation and Canada signed their self-government treaty, 2 Dakota First Nations in Manitoba launched a legal challenge against it. Reporter Sierra Bettens takes a closer look.
On November 30th in Winnipeg, Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand and Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anandasangri signed the Red River Métis Self-Government and Implementation Treaty. It recognizes the MMF as a government of the Red River Métis and affirms its internal lawmaking powers for its citizenship.
This treaty sets the stone solid. It carves the pathway to ensure and enshrine that our government will be recognized. I am not a group. I'm not an organization. I'm not an advocacy group. I am a government. And that's what they need to understand.
However, on December 2nd, the Dakota Teepee and Tinupu-Aquash First Nations filed an injunction against it. The MMF and the Attorney General of Canada are named as respondents. The Dakotas argue that the treaty is constitutionally invalid and that Canada and the Red River Métis failed to consult them. They demand an injunction prohibiting the MMF from making land and resource claims without consulting them. In a phone interview with APTN, Dakota Teepee Chief Dennis Pache said the injunction asserts their rights.
Not any animosity or anything, it's just that the government is neglecting Dakota people. They did give us an apology July 15th of this year, but they've refused to meet with us or are not wanting to work with us to implement what that means.
MMF Minister Will Goodon said the Dakota injunction was disappointing and that it asserts a false hierarchy of rights.
I think that there's misconceptions out there that in the Constitution there is a hierarchy, that there is different levels of rights, and different nations have different constitutional rights, which isn't true.
The injunction is the second legal action the Dakotas have launched against the MMF this year. On October 11th, Dakota Teepee and Chinoopawakpa filed a statement of claim against the MMF, Manitoba, and Canada's Attorney General, alleging they were excluded from land and resource consultations. It called for a distinctions-based approach to Indigenous rights.
So we were here based on a distinctions-based process of time. Who was here 12,000 years ago, who was here 1,000, who was here, and so forth. And that's a process that's been used in British Columbia.
Goodon agrees that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit must be recognized as distinct and urges Canada to deliver on treaty obligations.
Going back to Louis Riel, when he negotiated our entry into Confederation, he made sure that in the talks was that Canada needed to sign treaties with First Nations. So we're going back to those days, and we still agree that Canada needs to fulfill its obligations to all Indigenous peoples.
The Red River Métis Treaty does not include harvesting or land rights. Section 95 discusses the procedures to be taken if the treaty infringes on the rights of other Indigenous peoples, which includes a 3-step dispute process. Goodon said consultations with First Nations on the treaty were the Crown's duty, not the MMF's. In a statement sent to APTN, Jacinth Goulet, speaking for Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, said the treaty included over a year of consultations with other Indigenous groups, including First Nations in Manitoba, before it was finalized. She said Canada is now reviewing the motion. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Alberta now, where the family of an Indigenous man who had his braids cut off in a hospital in Edmonton is demanding answers. Back in May, 84-year-old Dexter Adams had his braids cut by a nurse. When his wife came to visit, she found them in the garbage, along with his eagle feather and bear grease used for his hair. Alberta Health Services isn't providing details, but did tell CTV News this should not have happened.
The cutting of my uncle's hair caused all of us great emotional and spiritual harm. It also evoked past cultural trauma that my uncle, his family, and community experienced throughout their lives.
Dexter Adams, who was from the Pasqua First Nation in Saskatchewan and a day school survivor, died in hospital a few weeks later following his battle with dementia. In a statement, Alberta Health Services says the incident is deeply regrettable and never should have happened. It says it has policy to receive informed consent before cutting hair, even for medical reasons. It has since held 3 in-person staff sessions at the hospital about the cultural significance of hair for Indigenous peoples and has added that information to its internal website. The health minister says she is extremely concerned about this case and is committed to work with the Indigenous communities to ensure respectful, high quality, and culturally appropriate care. Some members of the Piikani Nation in southern Alberta walked in a protest on Monday against the proposed opening of a new thermal coal mine. The Grassy Mountain Coal Project just passed a vote by local residents with 70% approving. The Australian-owned mine would produce 4.5 million tons of steel, making coal for Asian markets. Residents of the Piikani Nation, located 75 kilometers downstream of the site, are concerned about the environmental impacts.
It's an open pit mine, and anyone knows that within southern Alberta, we have hurricane winds down here. And all that, whatever they're drilling, whatever's coming out of the ground that they're drilling, that's going to come our way, be blown our way. We have chronically ill, we have elders. So the selenium deposits we're afraid of the levels that it might poison the river, the Old Man River.
A First Nation police service in Northern Ontario has signed an agreement with the province to become an essential service. It's a signing organizers say will increase safety for its officers and improve infrastructure. And it comes decades after calls to increase resources. The agreement was signed in Toronto on Tuesday. The Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service will now be the first ever First Nation police service to work under the umbrella of Ontario's Community Safety and Policing Act. Ontario also announced it will invest $514 million to help double the number of officers to more than 500. Anishinaabe-Aski Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler says the agreement will allow the force to have the same standards as every other force across Ontario. The Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service works on 34 First Nations in Northern Ontario.
The regulations that will support this or this legislation will include the creation of standards, and that's something that's been just missing over the last 30 years, that our police service will need to adhere to certain standards like any other police service.
We intend to hire 20 per class. There's 4 classes a year, so that's 80 a year. So we hope to be staffed up. We lose 20 a year because of the remoteness and the challenges of the policing. So our hope is within 6 years we'll be staffed up.
What this opt-in does today is it sends a message that Ontario will do what it has to do when others won't and when others can't.
The House of Commons Parliamentary Committee on Indigenous Affairs is studying barriers to economic development. But the conversation among several members of Parliament and witnesses focused on the fraud associated with false Indigenous identity. Conservative MP Martin Shields used Liberal MP Randy Boissonneau's resignation from Cabinet as an example to ask, why would people risk their political reputation by claiming false indigeneity? Lawyer Leah Ballantyne responded that there are gaps in the term Indigenous that allow people to further their careers by appropriating an Indigenous identity. She also said part of the problem is that the Métis are not well defined.
In fact, I beg to ask this committee, where is the definition of Métis? I don't see it. And I also see in recommendation 25 and 26 that the Métis get put on the same level as the First Nation and the Inuit, the 3 partners under Section 35. And without having that legal definition of what Métis is highly problematic.
More wind projects have been announced for Vancouver Island. That story when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. BC Hydro has selected 9 new energy projects to supply clean and affordable electricity to communities across the province. One of them is on Vancouver Island. In response to its call for renewable electricity generators, BC Hydro says it received a strong response. The 9 clean energy projects, including the Brewster Wind Project near Campbell River, will provide nearly 5,000 gigawatt hours per year of electricity to BC's grid. That is enough to power 500,000 new homes, boosting energy supplies by 8%. At the heart of these projects, though, is an effort to work with and for BC First Nations.
Yes, electricity demand is growing in the province, and especially if you look into longer term forecasts with BC Hydro. So it's been about 15 years since they've had a call for power like this. And what's new in this round is that Indigenous participation played a fundamental aspect of this in this call for power.
The wind projects aim to not only supply BC residents with renewable energy, but also acts as a further stepping stone in economic reconciliation for BC First Nations. It has been 49 years since the murder of Mae Pictou-Aquash, and a new documentary about her comes out on Wednesday. After 30 years of fighting for justice, Mae's daughter Denise Pictou-Maloney says she is finally at peace. Angel Moore reports.
It's poignant to me because it's just, you know, how you go from, you know, the bouffant fashionista to a mugshot. You know, there's a lot of story in there.
Denise Pictou-Maloney is looking at photos of her mother, Mae Pictou-Aquash. Aquash was an activist, a teacher, and a member of the Sabaganagati First Nation. Maloney compares 2 pictures when her mother became active in fighting for Indigenous rights.
And what she taught me in this and what I see in that transition, you know, where she comes to, where she's let her hair grow and she's now, you know, more worried about the human rights initiatives and the Indigenous human rights as opposed to imagery showing up of being accepted. I saw that shift in her, and it was empowering to me to see a woman go through that commitment.
Aquash joined the American Indian Movement, a grassroots organization founded in 1968 to protect First Nations rights in the U.S. Maloney says her mother was an inspiration.
I just think of how raggedy-ass she was. That's literally the only way I can describe it. I don't see anything that would, you know, think any kind of regret. I loved her here and I loved her here. And never did it matter, because to us she was always our mother.
Aquash was murdered in mid-December in 1975 in the Pine Ridge Reservation in North Dakota. She was 30 years old. 2 people were convicted of her murder, one in 2004 and the other in 2010. Maloney agreed to participate in a 4-part docu-series called Vow of Silence, the assassination of Mae.
There's no confusion anymore. You know, people who have been able to witness the documentary in the States are not confused about what happened to my mom. As a matter of fact, I see groups of women rising up and agreeing and saying, you know what, this needs to stop.
Maloney hopes the docu-series helps other MMIWG family and survivors.
So I want to say this to my family members and to sisters and, you know, other impacted survivors. This was never ever about just Mae. This was always about the next 7 generations.
After decades of advocacy for justice, Maloney says now she is at peace.
To me, you know, this year feels different because I feel like I have a place to put that. I don't have to carry it anymore.
Vow of Silence, the assassination of Mae, will be streaming in Canada on December 11th on Disney+. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Thank you, Angel. We now want to tell you about this week's web poll question. Over on our website, we ask, should there be alternatives to swearing an oath to the king for new politicians? Your answers are yes, no, or unsure. Go to www.aptnnews.ca to have your say. An award-winning Indigenous-owned winery in BC has teamed up with Indigenous artists. That story when we were back in less than 3 minutes. Starting on the east, St. John's 4, Charlottetown 5. Happy Valley, Goose Bay, -11, Cartwright, -8. Gaspé 3, Saguenay 1. Ottawa 2, Sarnia 8. -12 in Wawa, Thunder Bay, -12 as well. -22 in Churchill, Norway House, -32. -27 in Gimli, -30 in Dauphin. -23 in Regina, Saskatoon, partly cloudy and -22. Buffalo Narrows, sun and -29, Stony Rapids, -39. -20 in Fort Chipewyan, high level, -11. 0 in Calgary, Lethbridge, -3. 1 in Kamloops, Bella Coola, 3. Smithers, -1, Fort Nelson, -12. -13 in Watson Lake, Dawson, -9. -21 in Wati, Wrigley, -12. -9 in Inuvik, Paulatuk, -21. -27 in Baker Lake, Chesterfield, -10. Clyde River, -21, and Igloolik, -19. A winery owned by a First Nation in British Columbia has developed a special collaboration with Indigenous artists from their territory just in time for Christmas. Inca Meep Cellars Winery was started by the Osoyoos Indian Band in 2000. Since then, their wines have won numerous awards around the world. Located along the shores of Osoyoos Lake in BC's wine country, the company brings in over $1 million a year in sales. And thanks to that, they've been able to invest in other businesses. This year, they have collaborated with artist John Paul Velton to create these special edition ornaments that include words from their language. Justin Hall speaks for Inca Meep Cellars.
These are going to be accessible. I think they're coming through to our wine club as well. it's going to be, I'm really excited for it. It's part of our story as well with the 4 food chiefs that are on there. There's the king salmon, which is Intiti, Sia, which is a Saskatoon berry, the bitter root, which is Speetlum in our language as well, and the bear, Skimheast. Yeah, so I think it's a cool part of our story, and to have these, celebrate our winter packages is going to be awesome.
To Australia now, where Indigenous acts from rap to country dominated, taking home 8 ARIA Awards. Hip-hop supergroup 3% announced their arrival as a force to be reckoned with in Australian music after winning awards and delivering a powerful message. NITV's Masala Singalanga reports.
A traditional dance marks the arrival of rappers 3% at the ARIA Awards. Inside, they showed more modern moves performing with Jessica Malboy. 3% won 2 ARIAs, one for Best Hip Hop Rap Release.
We're very grateful that we got this. Kill the Dead, we made that album at a time when Australia said our people shouldn't have a voice. Well, it looks like they heard it.
Formed a year ago, the group is made up of Nookie, Dallas Woods and Angus Field. 3% also won the ARIA for cover art, a dot painting of Nicky Winmer's iconic protests against racism.
It takes a lot of strength to stand up against adversary and in whatever form or shape it comes.
International superstar Kid Leroy performed.
Girls just wanna have fun. I don't know your plans, no. But I just wanna get some.
Murawari rapper Dobby won Best World Music.
World Music, Radical Sun, Christine Anu and Dobby all speaking Indigenous languages. If anything, we should be the most Australian act on this roster.
Flickering in the dark like an old street light.
Troy Casadale took home the award for Best Country Album. Between the Fires is about the grief of losing his mother.
I want to say thank you to my beautiful wife, Laurel. I was running between 2 fires, very grief-stricken when I lost my mum. And she kept that fire burning in Brisbane while I went down and sorted myself out with sorry business.
Emily Watamara won her first ARIA for the Best Adult Contemporary Album.
The songwriting dates back to my high school years.
Wow.
And, it's a big, big record, but it's the proudest thing I've ever achieved.
Budgerah accepted an ARIA for Best Original Soundtrack on behalf of himself and Electric Fields, Jessica Malboy, Maisha and King Stingray.
Music is such a special way to tell a story.
JK47 won the ARIA for the best use of a song in an ad. DJ Cyril presented Arnhem Land's Nathaniel Miller with the ARIA for Music Teacher of the Year. A night that showcased First Nations performers and their strong messages. Marcella Sinalanga.